All right, welcome back. This is part 2 of our making our Power Apps more user-friendly. We're going to walk through some additional things with Josh today and kind of clean up our application once and for all, get all the kinks out of it and make it truly nice for the end user. If you haven't seen that first video, be sure to go give that a watch and then we'll see you back here. Thanks again for watching. Well, this screen is looking a lot better already. Let's talk about another screen that's got a little bit of complexity to it. Josh, you had pointed out our filter screen kind of lacked clear choices and common patterns like what people are used to. I think there's a number of things that we can talk about here. Why don't you give us some insight?
Certainly. With this screen, there's not a lot of clear purpose to it, if that makes sense. We have a couple drop boxes that are placed just kind of centrally here, and then we have some icons without context. Now, on the other screen, I had mentioned that it's possible to have icons without words, assuming they're clear and obvious. You know, a map icon is pretty obvious, but when I look at these, I'm not sure what they do. And in this instance, this is a binary choice. Now, looking at this from an outsider, I see 4 distinct options, and I'm not sure what they do. And these two, those are basically a radio button. You can only select one of them, but you can select as many as you want from here. And additionally, I grew up in an area where wireless internet has been the standard. So I had to look up what that even was. I might be, aging myself here, but that's not very clear. So a good way to approach this might be to have a list of options and use the words. If we want to have the icons as well, that's not going to hurt us, but it doesn't help us all that much. So if we list the values for the filters, and then on the right-hand side here, if we have clear and obvious selectors, that would be a better way for us to establish that behavior. So for some things, you can just have a toggle switch. On and off, you don't need to give them a drop-down. You can just have a switch on, off. But
so in this case, Josh, I've actually pre-built I've got the after version of this because it took a little bit of work to change this around. So I'm going to open up this in my other application here, and we'll get to that filter screen. Okay. And so this is the new version that we basically came up with based on that feedback.
This is already a lot better. The good things that I see here are for capacity, you can use that slider functionality, but we're not forced into that. You know, sometimes it's a little hard to be precise with a slider, so it's easy to go up and down by a lot of values with it, but we can also just type in whatever number we want. And that's really a usable way to select multiple items like this. Now for the dock, we have a Dell dock, we have a Lenovo dock, and we have none. That's not something that would work with just an on and off toggle, so it does make sense for us to have a drop down with additional context. Same with the monitors. We've got 1, we've got 2, we've got none. That's great. For these ones, we've used an on and off switch, which is a great way of giving somebody a binary choice. They don't need to specify a specific value. They just need on or off. So giving them that toggle is a great way to do that.
So the other change that I made here, Josh, based on some of your recommendation was I changed filter from apply, this button here at the bottom. It used to say apply, and it was our primary color. I changed it to secondary since it's not necessarily our primary purpose.
So I can see where somebody would make that mistake. You kind of have to think on a screen-to-screen basis as to what your objective is. So I had mentioned book being the primary objective for that screen, and it is the primary objective of the app. But since this is a filter screen, the primary objective is to filter things. So in this case, that could be our primary call to action. We could keep that yellow, and we could be more specific and say apply filter. That way it's very clear, 1, that your goal is to apply these filters, and 2, that we are in fact applying those filters, because we've got plenty of room down there to be specific. Okay,
well that makes sense. Now I understand. We can kind of put ourselves into the world of the screen that we're in and think about the primary objective there. So let me change this back to what we had. Got my yellow and apply. And in this particular case, does it make sense to have the same application that we did to the book button across the bottom?
Yes, it does. For the most part, consistency is always key. It's a really good thing to have all of your similar behaviors look and feel the same for users across different screens. So it shouldn't matter what you're doing, if you're applying something, if you're selecting something that's a primary call to action, having the same call to action button makes sense.
Now I think we squared that away.
That's already looking a lot better.
Thank you, Josh, for pointing that out. All right, so one of the other big areas in your blog post was talked about Gestalt, and hopefully I'm pronouncing that right, principles.
Gestalt, I've heard it a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and I think it's really important because it talks about proximity as being relevant for helping users understand what things are grouped together, and reduces confusion overall.
Exactly.
Right?
I've mentioned Gestalt in a little bit more detail in that blog article that we talked about earlier, but one of the big principles of Gestalt is proximity. And our brains really like patterns, so we try to make sense of what's around us by cognitively organizing things. And the principle of proximity states that our brain is going to associate things that are close to one another with one another. Mm-hmm. So by bringing something close to another thing, we group those things together mentally. And similarly, by pushing something apart, we distance them mentally. So in this example, this information is all evenly spaced, and it's not quite as clear what's related to what. So in this case, if we move the headquarters a little bit closer to the select floor, that's going to help our brains mentally associate those things.
Well, and what's really going on here, Josh, is on the previous screen, right, I've selected something, right? Mm-hmm. And so whenever I select something, I'm adding to the context of my journey.
Exactly.
Right? And so now I've joined that to the context of selecting a floor.
Exactly.
Right? Okay, so then by that same principle, it would apply on the next screen, where we might want to make sure that this is squeezed up closer, which I think it already is in this case, just by luck. And then our other items are grouped together down below as well.
Exactly.
Very good. So the next area, or one of the big areas that you talk about in your blog post, is accessibility.
Yes.
And so some things like colors matter, right? That's a big one. I think a lot of people are familiar with that one. What are some things, I think on this screen in particular, there are some color issues, right, that some users might have a challenge with?
Exactly. We use yellow as a primary color, which is a great way for us to express ourselves and our brand individually. But the problem with yellow is that yellow is not terribly accessible. This yellow makes it really, really difficult to actually read what that word says. And when we select it, it's a little hard to see what that icon is. In our case, it would be more valuable for us to change that either to a darker secondary brand color or even just black, gray, something along those lines. There's actually a guideline for color contrast. It's called the WCAG Color Contrast Guidelines. And typically you want to achieve at least a 3-to-1 color ratio. And this, I'm not confident this would be even a 1.5-to-1 ratio.
Okay, well we can change this to black. I mean, that's a good default to go with without having a better option.
Exactly.
And let me get our select icon. Whoop. Go.
It actually matters. Just pause for a second.
Sure.
It doesn't matter as much for an icon.
Okay.
I don't know if we have a way that we could pick a darker yellow, because as long as the icon is obvious and it isn't like something that has to be red,
right? The
rules for icons are slightly different. Now we could either use a darker yellow, we could make it an orange, or for the sake of the video, we could just do black to make it easy.
Yeah. That's what I was going to do. That's kind of how the outline I put together was.
Sure.
Like, just make it black so it shows up, because I think you're right.
Because yellow does look nice, and I've got a dark yellow that I have been using randomly, but I don't have the hex code memorized.
All right, so in this case, then I'm just going to simply make our icon black as well, just for the sake of making the change. So again, we'll change it from our primary one to black.
Yeah.
And right away you can see the difference. That's a good change.
That already helps a lot. Now, if somebody had a secondary brand color other than yellow, that would be a good place to use that. But in our case, black is just easier because yellow is hard to work with.
I like it. So then one last thing that you mentioned when it came to accessibility was that we're using title case in a lot of our buttons. Talk to us about that and how that affects accessibility.
See, the problem is actually that we're not using title case. We tend to use all caps here, and for short calls to action, that's not always a big deal. But the way that people read is not just by the letters as the letters. They read the letters as a shape. So we kind of cheat by looking at the shape of a word and we can tell what that means. We see the ascenders of a letter and the descenders of a letter, and we kind of skip what's in the middle.
Got it.
When you use all caps, people have to read each letter individually, and it forces people to think a lot harder than they want to when they're interacting with an app.
Yeah, so I had called out that we were using title case. We're actually not. We're using all caps in a lot of cases. So thanks for correcting me on that. But you're simply saying change it to something like that, and it's easier for the users to read. So if we go back, I think there's some other buttons where this is applicable. So if we go back to this screen. Right,
these buttons especially.
Caps. Yep.
So this is really hard for somebody with a condition like dyslexia, actually, which I actually have. It's really hard for us to read something like this because we don't see the shapes of the letters. We just see a block. And we have to read each letter individually. And now that we've fixed this, you see the word workspace, the W is tall, the K is tall, and the P is short. The P hangs down. So we can see the shape of the word rather than just having to individually read each letter. And that reduces cognitive load, and it makes it a lot easier to interact.
Yeah, so like reducing cognitive load, I just realized like even if you're not dyslexic or don't have a challenge, this helps you read it faster.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of accessibility. Like we might be designing things so that people with specific conditions or ailments or abilities can access something, but it makes it easier for everyone. If you think about curb cuts in the sidewalk, they were designed for wheelchair users, but if you're a parent with a stroller or if you're a kid with a skateboard or somebody that has to deliver something with a dolly cart, those curb cuts make your life easier too.
Yep, everyone benefits.
Exactly.
Great point, Josh. All right, I think that's all the changes we're going to make for today. I want to thank Josh again for being here with us and kind of giving us the pointers and these tips. This is definitely going to be going a long way in terms of educating those of us who are building Canvas apps or Power Apps and making things better for the end users.
Yeah, glad to be here and glad I could help.
Yeah, and if you want to read more or understand more about this, you can always go out there and visit Josh's blog, Basics for User-Friendly Design. It's on our website. I encourage you to do that. If you like this content, be sure to subscribe to our channel. If you have any questions or comments, you can post them at the end of this video, and we'll get to those when we can. And also remember that we do a monthly office hours where you can attend and bring your own questions or challenges, and we'll try to help you get unstuck. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.